Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel. It is time for some meta predictions for the Milwaukee Regionals. So Milwaukee is coming up this weekend, and I will be in attendance. I cannot wait for Milwaukee, and it is time to do my meta predictions, talk about the decks, talk about what I think will do well, what might win the tournament, and all that good stuff. So, like, the main thing we got to talk about is, of course, Lost Box. Lost Box is still the BDIF in the format. I don't think anybody is going to argue that. Lost Box is the best deck. Turbo Lost Box is the best way to play it. I think the Kyogre build is the best version of Turbo Lost Box, but the other Turbo Lost Box, though, Kyogre, is also perfectly fine. It still has a lot of advantages. Either way, I think Lost Box is more favored going into Milwaukee, mainly because of the popularity of Mew. I think Mew is going to be even more popular than it was in Hartford due to the fact that it won Hartford, right? And now everybody's on this Meloetta train, and that just helps Lost Box a lot. I think Lost Box has a pretty good time into Meloetta Mew. There are some advantages, like they can Roxanne you if you go KO Meloetta, and then you have to KO like a Genesect. But overall, I do think that like Kyogre is just better against Mew, and even the Turbo build with a Drapion can get you over there. I think the Skyseal Stone, you don't need it because, I mean, if you're going to go KO Meloetta, KO 2 Mew VMAXs, you still have to take a, 7-prize card game, though you could get a KO at some point on a Genesect, but it will be tricky. But I do think Lost Box is just favored now for Milwaukee because it's just better into Mew, and Mew is more popular right now, and that is going to ultimately help Lost Box get to, do better. So we're probably going to definitely see a Lost Box in top 8 because I think it's just that good. Probably going to see maybe even, the Kyogre build in top 8 because Kyogre is just insane against Mew. And then, of course, we got other variants. We got the Articuno Kyogre build, and this was piloted by Raymond Long, who did get top 8 in Hartford. And Raymond really does like his Articunos. Trust me, I've seen it before at League Cups. He's pretty much like sold on it. And I think the Articuno is really good right now into a field full of Arceus and Lugia. Articuno is just very good against Lugia. It's also a card that nobody sees coming when you're playing against Lost Box, and that's like the big advantage. As long as you just don't like, I'm sure if Raymond were to play this deck again and brought it to Milwaukee, he probably would have an opponent that would expect the Articuno and try to kind of play around it. But I don't think most people, your average Joe Schmo you would run into, would probably not see the Articuno coming. I think the Articuno just catches people off guard. I think that's one of the advantages of it. It can get you an easy, it can win you a game 1, which is the big advantage. I think Articuno is still good for Hartford because, I mean, you're still probably going to play against Lugia, Arceus, and those are the 2 matchups where the Articuno is going to shine in. It's decent against Gardevoir too, but for the most part, you're going to use it against Lugia and Arceus. That's where it's going to shine. Being able to paralyze a Duraludon VMAX, being able to paralyze, Lugia or paralyzed Tyranitar. It's just really, really good. You force Penny out of them. It's just a really good card. And it's also, again, a card that most people will not expect to be played. Then we got Sableye Cramzard, which is still probably a fine play, too. Like, Sableye Cramzard is still an underdog of the Lost Box archetype, where people like it, but it just doesn't really have the results. We haven't seen a Sableye Cramzard make top 8 since EUIC, I don't think. So it's been a while since this deck has been able to kind of shine, but I'm still wouldn't be surprised if a couple of these squeaked into like top 32. It's a deck that people still kind of main, and it's still a very powerful deck. Being able to get to turn 2 Sableye really easily, the power of Choice Belt and Defiance Band can be really good. I think Belt is actually kind of insane in the deck when combined with Cramorant, especially against Arceus. When I was playing Arcdura and in the last round 15, I played against the Sableye Cramzard deck, the Defiance Band and Belts were making a big deal. But yeah, I do think that Sableye Cramzard is pretty decent still in the format. Its biggest issue is going to be Lost City's popularity. Lost City does body this deck as they're able to get rid of your Charizard, and you don't have extra Charizard. That can be pretty bad. Lost City can also just ruin your game plan when you're only playing, that so many attackers, right, with like Sableye and Cram. So it can make things awkward, but it's still just a really strong deck, and it can actually chase to a turn 2 Lost Mine, which is insane. And being able to get, like, Lost Mine before your opponent in a mirror match is just super crucial to winning the mirror. Next up, we got Lugia, which is basically the second best deck right now. You could debate Lugia being the best deck, and Lugia might even be better now because of the popularity of Meloetta. I do think that Lugia actually is a bit more favored into the Fusion Mew and the Double Turbo Mews, because all you really do is if you just set up the double Archeops against Mew, you kind of just win, right? Because you have the Evil Tall, you have Gift Energy, you have Tyranitar, Gift Energy, V-Guard Energy is kind of decent too. You just have to not get bodied by like Echoing Horn and boss shenanigans. And I guess the problem with the fusion matchup is you're forced to bench the double Lugia, but you can still get 2 V-Stars in play, and the V-Star is still insanely tanky. So yeah, I still think that Lugia is just an insane deck. Probably still going to be the second most played deck. We're going to see Lugia in top 8. Lugia hasn't won the major regionals yet. You know, it did get second, did lose to Fusion Mew in the finals. We could finally see a Lugia deck win. I would put money on Lugia maybe finally being able to take down a regionals. We could see Lugia Single Strike win Milwaukee. It's possible. I think it is possible because it still has a decent Lost Box matchup. It has an okay Mew matchup. And then, of course, Mew is the big talk of the town. Because Fusion Mew did win Hartford, we're probably going to see a little bit more Fusion Mew C play and also double Turbo Mew. I think both DT Mew and Fusion Mew are both going to be fairly popular decks because they're both just doing the same thing, right? Fusion Mew allows you to use the Meloetta Donk, which can be very good against Arceus and Lugia, and then also the double Turbo Mew is still good against Lost Box, and Mew is just still a really good deck right now, and due to the fact that there's 2 versions of Mew, it's going to increase its popularity even more. If you're hitting maybe like if you're getting day 2 and you're playing against like maybe 2 to 3 Mew per tournament, that might go up to, you know, 4, maybe even 5 Mew decks. Maybe even not 5, but there is a world where like 4 and 5 could be the uptick due to the fact there's now 2 versions of Mew that are both decently popular. So Mew's going to see more play. You're most likely going to play against more Mew than you had before in a regional, so you definitely have to be prepared for the Mew matchup with your deck selection. Now the question is, will Meloetta Mew flop? I think it might have a good chance of flopping, but it still will be maybe optimal. Who knows? It could be the optimal way to play Mew. Being able to donk Arceus Vs is actually really good. Like when I'm playing Arceus, I'm honestly praying that they're not playing the Meloetta build, because if I'm getting donked by Meloetta, I'm losing the game. Because there's no way I'm coming back from a turn 1 knockout of my Arceus V, especially if I just have a lone Arceus. Like if I ain't drawn the turn 1 double nest ball Arceus, or if I'm not drawn into 2 ways to get an Arceus down and I get, you know, turn 1 donked by Meloetta, bro, I ain't winning that game. I'm just gonna say right now that at that point I'm chalking things up. I'm probably losing that game. But Arctura, still a pretty solid deck. I am considering playing it again, to be honest. I think it's still just a really good deck. I don't know how it evolves going forward. Like, I don't know if it's going to be playing Drapion or not. I don't know if there's anything to cut. I don't know if you cut the Alakazam and the Hawlucha, but I still think the Umbreon Dura is a great deck. It's got a pretty solid matchup against Lugia. If, like, I didn't lose to Lugia in Hartford because, you know, if you just get the Dura in play and you're able to deal with the Urshifu, you can't really lose that game. So I think that this deck is still insanely good. I don't know how it really evolves going forward. It just has to kind of adapt to the Mew matchup, I think, and the deck's perfectly fine and set for the rest of the tournament. And then, of course, you got Guardy variants, which, yeah, Gardevoir, again, is kind of like the top 5. But, yeah, Gardevoir is kind of the still going to be popular. There's still people, despite the deck having that awkward Lost Box matchup, there's still people that are going to play it and do well with it because it's just a deck that people like to play no matter what. It's just a deck that will always kind of be around, in my opinion, in this format. And obviously, Guardy gets better in Paldea Evolve, but it's still just a deck people will play no matter what. And I think it is a deck that we will still see a lot of. You're probably still going to play against, you know, at least, you know, a couple Guardies in day 1, maybe even, you know, 4 Guardies, 3 Guardies in total in the entire tournament, depending on whether you make day 2. But definitely expect to play against a couple Guardies in day 1. I think that it is popular enough for that to still be a thing. And honestly, Guardy's Mew matchup isn't even that bad either. The Meloetta Mew matchup for Guardy honestly is pretty solid too. Because Meloetta doesn't do too much in the matchup, and the Meloetta build doesn't play as many paths, and that can be better for Guardy. And even if they do play the path, they're only playing a couple, which can be hard for them to get those paths turns to stick. And you play more stadiums than they do, so you don't have to worry about paths sticking a lot of the time. So I would still say that Guardy is actually decent into the Mew matchup. So honestly, still expect to see Guardy. Next up is the Arctina deck, which is like, yeah, I don't even know where Arctina goes into Milwaukee. Again, whether or not it's playing Drapion, whether or not you're playing, you know, whatever, Dark Attacker, I don't know. You're probably just sticking to the Arctina. The one thing to note is whether or not Mew is going to play Oricorio. Oricorio is the main counter to Arctina for Mew. If Mew just plays an Oricorio, they're going to have a hard time losing to Arctina, because then you're not one-shotting your opponent. So it gets a little tricky at that point. So Arctina might have to figure out a couple avenues to take going into the Mew meta, but I still think Arctina is a pretty solid play. People are going to play it because it doesn't really go up and down on the graph, in my opinion, other than just trying to adapt to the Meloetta Mew deck. But speaking of Arc decks, I want to talk about the Arc Vulpix Dura deck. So this actually did win a tournament. I think it was in Thailand, I think. So this deck is, like, still good, in my opinion. And I think the nice thing about Vulpix is it's actually kind of a split down the middle between being both good against Mew and Gardevoir. So Gardevoir no longer really cares about the Vulpix. I feel like the odds that you hit a Gardevoir player that techs for the Vulpix heavily, you're not going to have to worry about that. I think if you're going to play this deck, you probably want to play at least 3 switching cards to counter the... you're probably going to want to play 3 switch and maybe even a Volo. But other than that, I think that this could still be a good call for Milwaukee. One of the things I do like about this deck is that Vulpix and Drapion are both just really good against Mew. I mean, against Mew, you have Silvery Snowstar and 2 Drapions. How can you lose? Again, you just have to get through the Meloetta. I do like Arctura Vulpix. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody had a good run with this deck in Milwaukee, because it does feel like this deck could maybe come back into the meta, mainly because it seems better for Mew, and you also have a good Guardy matchup, because Guardy still plays the memory skip roles. But okay, we look back at the list I just looked at, which is my friend Hamza's list. He played 1 memory skip Ralts. You literally just go Lost City, switch, knock out the Ralts, you win the game. Like, you can't lose at that point, right? And again, Guardy doesn't care about Vulpix anymore. Vulpix is no longer a presence in the meta for Guardy to care about. And I don't know, man. I'm liking the idea of a Vulpix Arctura deck doing well again. I don't know, man. This could be like a bubbling under deck. Just saying. Because Vulpix isn't bad against Lugia or Mew either, don't forget. Next up, of course, we do have the Arc Pile deck. Just another deck that people just seem to play and do well with. This is from EUIC. It's been a while since this deck has been relevant, but this could maybe make a resurgence. I'm just saying, because Arc Piles are just pretty good right now, you know what I mean? And this Arctura Espeon deck could be pretty solid. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody maybe did well with it. Does seem like a pretty good deck in the format. I think the big thing about it is having the Vulpix Pikachu, both pretty good against Lost Box. Espeon also pretty good. Again, it's a deck that will probably have to adapt, but if somebody were to play this, I mean, you could do well with it. Just to kind of figure out a better Lugia, like how to beat Lugia, but overall, this could still be like something that somebody plays and does well with. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if like an Arc Pile deck that featured Pikachu or Espeon did well, or Vulpix for that matter. And then, of course, we got Goodra, another kind of like deck that a lot of people still play, but I just don't know if it's very good. I think the issue with Goodra is that with the popularity of Duraludon, it's not a great meta call. Goodra just loses to Duraludon, and it doesn't work, man. So I'm not sold on the Goodra anymore. But people will still play it. And again, Goodra's a deck that, you know, we're probably going to see at least a couple in day 2. Maybe one will get top 32. Maybe one will get top 64. I don't see Goodra going any higher than like maybe a top 32 placement at best, because I just don't think the deck is like good enough in the meta. And I also think that a good Lost Box player can still beat you. And the only way Goodra can win sometimes is if your opponent doesn't know what they're doing against it, or they don't know how to beat the matchup. And I mean, Goodra could be better into the Mew meta. I'll be fair. Like, this deck isn't bad against Mew. It actually might have a better Mew matchup than most other V-Star decks right now. But that's because you have Cram and you have Drapion, and both of those are pretty good. You could even just go double Drapion and Cram, and you could just play, like, you could just go Cram, Knockout, and then Drapion twice to win the game. You might not even need Goodra at that point. Next up is Miraidon, which is like, you know, both Miraidon decks are both interesting. Now, I actually don't hate Miraidon in the meta right now. Again, I've talked about this before, but I think Miraidon is kind of cool. It's another deck that has the ability to get a turn 1 knockout on going second, and that can be pretty valuable against decks like Arceus V-Star, where they're unable to really capitalize on a pressure. Like, when you're playing against Miraidon and they hit like a turn 1 knockout with Miraidon or Raikou, it can be pretty devastating. And this deck is still it's a deck that can beat Arceus either by getting the first turn KO on the Arceus, or just by using, you know, a one-hit KO on the Duraludon. And that's kind of the thing you want to take note of, is the deck beating Duraludon. The Flaffy build does give you a little bit more leverage and safety nets with the Flaffy. You can even play an Ampharos EX in the deck, which I wouldn't hate playing in this deck going forward. It might be good for like the Lost Zone matchup. And then you got the Raichu Vs, which Raichu Vs is pretty good against Duraludon. I mean, really, to beat Arceus, all you really have to do is go knock out Arceus V, and then just Raichu blow up a Duraludon with a Sky Seal Stone. That's probably how you can just beat Arceus. And I think Miraidon boasts a pretty solid Arctura matchup. Now, your matchup against Arctina is a little more shaky due to the fact that they're going to spam Judge and Path at you, which can be hard to deal with. But there is some room for the Regieleki build to do well, too. I think Regieleki Miraidon is also a pretty solid deck. If you want to play Miraidon, both builds have their own ups and downs. I think that the ups of playing the Miraidon Regieleki build is you have just more one-hit KO potential with Regieleki VMAX. The problem is you're relying very heavily on generators getting energy, and that's where things get a little awkward. But this build can play the Klefki and the Regieleki V. You could even play like Luxray V or something to counter Lost Box. Like, Miraidon can be lost box. There are Pokemon that can beat you. You got the Magnezone, and then you have the Klefki, or you have Luxray. Like, those are your best 3 options, and you can even play a Flying Pikachu, but I think Flying Pikachu is not that good. But I think that overall, Miraidon is just a perfectly fine deck in the format, and I wouldn't be surprised if somebody did well with it, because it's just a deck that just randomly pops up. Will it get top 8 again? Probably not, but somebody could have a good run, because like, I wouldn't be surprised maybe Miraidon got top 8, just because you can hit a lot of Arceus. And I don't think Miraidon has a bad Mew matchup either, because you can, like, get a turn 1 Raikou KO, you have the Drapion in the deck. I don't even think Miraidon boasts for, like, a bad Mew matchup either. And then we got to talk about Rapid Strike. Now, Rapid Strike is another deck that isn't even bad right now. I mean, one, you have that, like, pretty good Miraidon matchup, but even beyond that, you have access to the Octillery Drapion combo for the Mew matchup. So against Mew, really all you do against Mew is you go Inteleon VMAX or something, knock out the Meloetta, and then you just go Drapion, they go knock you out, you go Octillery for Tower, have a Drapion out, and you go Drapion again. Because you can search for Tower for free, you can get rid of their Path to Peak, and you can just go Drapion twice. And that's actually pretty good. And Rapid Strike can also have a okay matchup versus Guardy, which is also pretty solid. So, again, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody played Rapid Strike and did decently well with it. Now, I maybe think you should probably play still the Drapion V-Star. I think the Drapion V-Star is still very valuable within the deck, because it does give you the ability to paralyze Duraludon. I think having that would be nice, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw the Inteleon Rapid Strike deck do well, because you still have that pretty good Lost Zone matchup, and then, of course, you also might be decent into Mew because of the Drapion Octillery engine. The Meloetta matchup is a bit more shakier, because you have to deal with the Meloetta, which you don't want to use Drapion against Meloetta, but you do have the Chloros. I mean, if worst case scenario, they don't Lost City or Drapion, you can still use 3 Drapion and just win the game. Now for some rogues. The first rogue deck I want to mention was Arc Gallade. This is a deck that got day 2 in Hartford. Really cool concept. Now, I like the idea of this. You have a good draw engine. You get Gallade, both Gallades, 1 for damage, 1 for a supporter. The Delphox is pretty spicy alongside the Radiant Charizard. This is a deck that I would love to just see do well in a tournament, but alas, I'm not sure this is a deck that somebody will just play. It seems like something that somebody played just for fun and did well with it. I'm sure they tested it, and it seems like a pretty cool deck, and I really do like this deck a lot. I just don't know if anyone is going to pick up on it and see that it got day 2 and be like, I'm going to play this, and then it's like, eh. And to be fair, this deck might be okay against Mew, though. You have a pretty good engine with Kirlias and Gallade, and honestly, this might not even be a bad deck for Mew. Even though you are an Arceus deck, you're not playing Arceus with a bunch of 2-prizers. You do have Drapion and Delphox, but your whole deck doesn't just have 2-prize. You have some single-prize options in there, and that might help you against Mew still. And Gallade isn't bad against Mew, because Gallade can do a lot of damage, because they'll put a lot of fees in play anyways. I don't know, man. I don't hate this. I would love to see somebody see this deck from day 2 at Hartford and then play it and do well with it, but we'll have to see if the dream is alive for that. And then we got Palkia, another deck that got day 2, another deck that's been kind of on the rise right now in popularity, and I could even see Palkia doing well. Palkia is another deck that I actually don't even think has a bad Mew matchup. I think its worst matchup might be Lost Zone, or not your worst matchup, but your most, like, awkward matchup might be the Lost Zone deck. But you do see the Empoleons are there. Palkia is another deck that does get to play Articuno, and I think any deck that can play Articuno right now could be good. It could help against Arcdura, which is another matchup that is kind of why I'm, like, skeptical on whether or not this Palkia deck is really good, is because, yeah, your Arcdura matchup might be a little shaky, but I don't hate this deck either. I think this could also be a pretty good deck for, yeah, it could be a pretty good deck for Hartford. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if a Palkia deck got day 2. Because there are people that do play it. And then we got to talk about Guardy Mewtwo. So the bad Guardy deck right now. But Guardy Mewtwo isn't that bad. But it just doesn't really seem to be doing anything other than, like, maybe being able to, like, beat Lost Box with, like, Klefki stall strats into, like, your Mewtwo. But I'm not sold in this deck. This deck might just be falling off in our format now. Yes, this deck will make a resurgence next format when we do get all the new cards, because there is some Guardy Mewtwo decks doing well in Japan right now, and it's not even the same idea, like, not the same strategy. It's a little bit more checkmatey of a deck. This one is a little bit more, still like a Guardy deck. You just have the Mewtwo in the deck. I don't know if we're going to see this deck do that well. Maybe we'll see one get day 2 at best, but I think we're kind of past Guardy Mewtwo being good. I don't think it really gains any advantages with Mew being popular either, and I think that you still have, like, a pretty rough time against Arc decks anyways. And then we got Lost Tina, another deck that a lot of people just meme on, but randomly can just do well in online tourneys, but hasn't translated well in IRL yet. But Arctina could be in a better spot than it is before. I think it actually has a fine Mew matchup, and I think it also has a very good Arceus matchup. I think all the Arceus decks, this deck farms Arceus. As long as you set up, I think this deck honestly just farms Arceus all day long, because you can just one-shot the V-Stars. You have Star Requiem against Duraludon, which is absurd. You can one-shot Umbreon VMAX with a belt. Like, I think this deck legit is, like, if we're ever going to see an Arctina deck do well in our pre-Paldea Evolve meta, this tournament could finally be the one where it shines, because right now, I think this deck has a fine Mew matchup. Both Bills of Mew, I think it's beatable. And I think it has a good matchup against Arc decks. I think the big hurdle is going to be Lugia and also Lost Box. But definitely, this deck is actually primed to be an okay deck in the format. I would not be surprised if we finally saw Arctina take down a tournament. Or not take down tournament, but actually have a good performance. Like, maybe even get, like, top 16. I don't know about top 8, but maybe top 16. But there you go. Those are my meta predictions. Overall, I think maybe it's time for Lugia to win a tourney, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more of these different Lost Box decks. Sableye Cramsar could squeak in a top 32. We could see the Articuno Kyogre deck that got top 8 in Hartford do well. And I do think that Arc decks are on the rise. We're probably going to see a lot more Arc Dura. Wouldn't be surprised if Arc Dura Vulpix maybe made a comeback, but I also think Arctina might start adjusting. Now, the nice thing about Arctina, too, is it has a better matchup in the Arc Dura matchup. That's the other thing I guess should mention. Arctina can actually beat Arc Dura, but I still think Arctina should just play a Flying Pikachu, because I'm still not sold in Lost Box matchup. Like, a Charon's Care I don't think is enough, but I don't know. Could be wrong. But yeah, that is it for my meta predictions video for Milwaukee. I will be at Milwaukee, so make sure y'all come up and say hi. Let me know what you think of my predictions down below. Again, I think Lugia could finally win the tourney, and we might see some new versions of Arcpile do well, and all that good stuff. And we'll see if Meloetta Mew is either optimal, or if Double Turbo Mew will have a better performance, and the highest placing Mew deck will be Double Turbo over Fusion. We'll have to see about that, but definitely expect to see a lot more Mew in Hartford, or Milwaukee at the end of the day. But thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure to subscribe to the second channel if you haven't already, and catch you on another video. Bye-bye.